Here so you can get your VCR to track and go get your popcorn, order the pizza, sit down and enjoy the video. Just memories I have of 1983 when I had my air coupe and I was flying cross country. One of my favorite memories, the good old air coupe. Now, I-beam wings, thinking of I-beam wings, look at the construction on this, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. This is Ray Moore at Flushing. He isn't in the hobby anymore, but he was kind of a Jimmy protege, and he was building Jimmy's, not planes, designs, paint jobs, whatever. Good guy, one of Big Jim's best friends, and a really good guy. We really miss you, Ray. Speaking of guys I miss, this is Chuck Holzapfel in his garage. Absolutely one of the nicest guys in stunt. And here he is contemplating how to fix this plane that obviously took a whack. Had he seen the repair videos, he'd be able to do this in a minute. Heck, I don't even work up a sweat fixing one of these. Chuck, come on back to the hobby. We really miss you. Larry Brickman. Photo from Larry Brickman. Speaking of Chuck Holzapfel, this is Chuck Holzapfel. I had given him this plane so he'd have a plane to fly when he ran out of planes. This was my 82 plane, the Executioner. I had given him this plane to fly, and he was, I guess, making a comeback at that point in time would be the right way to put it. But he built a couple of real neat planes. He built a giant biplane and a big 1,000 square inch plane. But haven't seen him at the local contest in the past year or two. Again, Chuck, come on back. Just another picture of my Execution. This plane had silver leaf lettering. Of course, I worked for Ford and it had Chevy emblems in the trim job. Kind of a cool plane. I like this plane. Now, if you like built-up wings, wrapped leading edges, all kind of hard-to-build construction, this is the plane for you. Obviously, we still have plans to this available too. This was published in Model Aviation, and as a spin-off on Billy Werwich's USA 1, this is the USSR 1. Same plane in my Willie Nelson truck driving days. Great plane. This is the cowl to the MiG. Notice how the muffler comes out and exits straight down. Blue anodized head. Big Jim Super Tiger 60. And the you can see the nose wheel mounted right to the motor. Right to the motor lugs. And probably my all-time favorite plane of all time, the 900 Sweeper. Oh boy. Favorite plane of all time. I finally wound up giving this one to John DeTavio in its older days, and he had a little accident with the ground, would be a nice way to put it. And by now you should have your VCR tracking, everything tracking, your Love Life tracking. And we're pretty much going to just show you the scoops on this, how nice the scoops worked out. This is the bottom of the MiG. Anyway, let's get on with the video. Let's get down to the shop and let's do some work. That's what this hobby is all about. Work, 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 work. Now, one of the things on today's agenda is going to be to get at least 4 or 5 coats of dope on these flaps and get them tissued. We haven't tissued the flaps yet. And I want to mention a couple of things about building up a substrate. Substrate means everything underneath the silver paint. One of the things you can get yourself in big trouble on, especially with a foam wing, is if you don't do the substrate the way it should be done. And I'll try to expound on that. There's 2 things that can happen that'll ruin a foam wing. Number one is you put too much thinner in the paint. The thinner goes down through the thin wing skins where the spots are thin, and what it ultimately does the skin delaminates. It loosens up the glue or the epoxy, or the wood just gets a ripple in it. And I'm sure everybody knows what that looks like on a foam wing. It has like the washboard effect. But one of the things you want to do when you get ready to do the substrate on these, and we've already done the substrate on the foam part, is do a little test on the bottom. Put your first coat of clear on. Make sure it's not too thin. If you see a problem with the skin lifting, you know, go back and put a little more paint in there. Mix is too thin. If it's too thick, and that's the most common problem, it'll go on and it'll be, number one, it'll be hard to sand. And that in itself is a pain in the neck. The sanding, the extra work of the sanding. Number two, what happens if you don't have enough thinner in the paint when you're building substrate? What happens is, every single time when you go to put the masking tape on the plane, assuming you're going to have some kind of trim on the plane, you put the masking tape on the plane and it pulls up the finish. And it's always because there's not enough of a mechanical or a chemical bond somewhere in the finish. And most likely it's right at this point here where we're putting dope on raw wood. If this first coat of dope goes on raw wood without enough thinner, what happens? You don't get any bond. And if you have too much thinner, it'll go down and melt the foam. So building up the substrate, the first thing you want to think about is get the mixture right. Roughly 60% 3608S, 40%, the new Sig Light Coat Clear, by the way, is excellent. That's a good place to start, and if anything, it'll need a little more thinner. Now remember the old trick from, I guess, from earlier on in the video set. Do the little parts first. This little part is tissued, and I can get a real good feel for, is this material going on? How's it looking? How's it drying? I don't want it so thick that I get brush strokes I have to sand out. I don't want it so thin I'm melting the foam or I'm swelling the wood, or in an extreme case you can go down and loosen up a glue joint. So what I like to do, obviously at this point in time, the little doors from the wing, the flaps, the little tip weight box, get all the little parts as your little guinea pigs, and then the last thing we'll go and do the wing. Now the wing has already been sanded out with 400. I put 4 coats of clear on, sanded it just a little bit, tissued this, 00 silk span, put on 3 more coats of clear. This will be the 4th coat of clear, and then I'll put a coat of, I'll sand it a little bit and put a coat of filler on. Now if we lived in an ideal world and you could wait long enough between coats, I would guess 24 hours between coats would be just about perfect. But that's not possible all the time. In this case, we put on 3 coats, 1 early in the morning, 1 around 12 o'clock, and 1 it's around 5 o'clock now. And that seems about right. We'll put this is the 4th one, and then we're going to go home for the night. That'll be it for tonight. Come back tomorrow, the next day. Obviously, if you could let this sit and dry for a week, the longer the better. The longer you let it dry, the easier it'll sand. Okay, that's the 4th coat of clear, and what I tried to show with the time-lapse photography thing is to try to get both sides wet at the same time. Don't dilly-dally, get the whole thing doped and put it aside to dry. Now the trick here is not to get impatient and try to sand this out the next day. You know this has got to go away for a few days. It's tissued, it's got 4 coats of clear. We want to put this away now. Hopefully it's sitting right by, there's a heating vent here that sends some heat out to it. Let it sit by a radiator. You don't want to put it in direct sunlight. These are just some tips that might help. And you want to be able to sand it off, and you might want to, rather than me putting all this back on the video, just check out the finishing videos for a couple of ways, like the balling up of the paint, that kind of a thing. Before you put filler coat on, you want to be able to sand this so there's no hint of balling up in the paint. Otherwise you're just trapping thinner in there. So the trick here is, let's put this away for a while. Now let's go work on some of the other projects we have around the shop. Alright, we're working with our little parts here. And one of the ways you know if you have just enough substrate is you'll just get just the least little bit of shine. And I'm just trying to get a reflection off the light. This is called candling. And when you see, geez, it's just a little shiny. Not a lot. Not a high gloss type of thing. Just starting to get shiny. Now you know you have enough clear on here. And now you can go ahead and get ready to do your filler. But obviously this would get sanded out. This is just a test to tell you that you have enough clear on here, and then you want to get mixing up the filler coat. Right, now today what we did, we took out our jar of filler. I think I showed this many times, how to make filler. Just rough numbers here. Would be about 1/3 thinner, 1/3 talc, 1/3 clear light coat. And then you let it sit in the jar for 5 minutes, and that lets all the extra talc sink to the bottom. And we're going to do that right now. We're mixing up the 2 little batches of talc we have here. And what we'll do is we'll let it sit 5 minutes and then pour off the clear, and that'll have just enough. Should have just enough talc, and I have a little bit of purple paint left in here. Let it sit 5 minutes, then pour off the top, and you're ready to start doing your filler coat. Okay, now I like to put on a coat of filler in the morning. So what I'll do is I'll put a coat of filler on this in the morning. I'll put a coat on maybe around 12 o'clock. Let it sit a few days. Sand it out, and then put the 3rd coat on. I like 3 coats. And usually then that 3rd coat of filler will be just about the right amount. Put a test coat of silver on, and we should have the beginning of our substrate. We'll start working up through the coats of silver. Now we also have that whole video available on sanding silver.
No.
Okay, this has 2 coats on. Now we're going to put this aside to dry till this afternoon. And we'll do all the little parts and bring this up to the point where we're ready. And then we'll sand the wing out and get ready to put some filler on the wing. Alright, we have 1 coat of filler on here now. Obviously we're going to flip it over and do the other side. Wait a half a day or so, put the 2nd coat on. Now a couple of things you can look for at this point in time. You know, you should be seeing any major flaws, like when you sanded out the tissue, if you went through the tissue in any spots, which you obviously shouldn't have done. You want to put a little extra dab on, a little extra filler there. Anything that's an edge, like the trailing edge here where it's a razor edge, radius the edge each time you sand it. Put a little bit of a radius in each time you sand it. Alright, so the next trick will be, obviously we're going to put this guy away to dry for 3, 6, 8 hours, how long we'll go do the work from the shop today. Now this looks like it's ready for the 2nd coat. Now what I try to do now is I try to feel for brush marks. If I feel the brush marks and this feels like it's a little on the thick side, I put a little extra thinner in the 2nd coat so I can kind of blend down the brush marks. Now this is a good time to take a close look at the filler. Now it looks just about right now. Now we've done a little bit of fine tuning on the filler. You should just not be able to feel a brush stroke. Okay, this morning we're taking the flaps while we're waiting for our filler to dry another day. Getting the glass area sanded out. I've already got 4 coats of clear on the flaps, and we'll silk span the flaps today. Now what I'm going to do on the flaps, I'm not going to use double O, I'm going to use medium silk span. And I'll show you the reason why, is I want to get the grain, of course, is parallel to the trailing edge, and I want to get the most torsional rigidity out of it. And a little bit of extra silk span there definitely will help make it stiff. Now I look down these flaps and they are really nice and straight. Real happy the way these came out. Anyway, I have to sand the glass in. Let me just show what this looks like. One's sanded in and one isn't. Yeah, this one has to be sanded yet. This one's sanded in. You really can't even feel the cloth. Now I'll just take 320 and just hit this. This is fuzzy now. This has the 3 coats of clear, and I'll hit it. And I won't hit it with a block, of course, because I just want to take the fuzz off very lightly. And I don't want to sand off, I certainly don't want to sand off all the clear, or there's no point putting it on. Then obviously we'll get into tissuing this with medium silk span. Actually, on one plane, on the green Meanie, I actually used heavy silk span because I wanted to stiffen up the flaps. The wood wasn't so great. This is good. You can see it's good C-grain wood. But I think the medium silk span will be a good choice here. Okay, this is the weight of silk span we're going to use. ST002, which I call medium grade. It's not double O. You obviously can buy it from SIG or whatever. Now just a couple of notations that'll help you in using this. Obviously some of the mistakes you can make, and what I may as well try to do is outline the potential mistakes you can make. You never do a flap that way. You don't use up old silk span. That's another problem. Don't use up some old silk span because you don't know if you're going with the grain or without it. It's important that you have the grain in all 4 pieces going the same way. So we want to cut our strips of silk span out that way. We don't want to cut one this way, one that way, one this way, that way. The object of that is to avoid a warp. Silk span does have a grain, and so if it shrinks in the same dimension on each piece, you would figure you're a little bit ahead of the game, as if one piece is shrinking up, one piece is shrinking down. In fact, here I got to get my first step here is going to be to get a new razor blade. So step 1 would be cut all 4 of the pieces. I put wax paper down on the table here just to make it easy for myself. Cut all 4 pieces exactly the same. Don't cut that old cookie cutter thing or try to use up old silk span or anything like that. That's a lot of nonsense. So the first thing we'll do is we'll cut 4 strips here exactly the same. Now obviously I sanded this down nicely with 320. It's got a nice matte finish on it. Sanded in the glass. Have the silk span all cut into strips. Now what I do is there's some differences using medium silk span instead of double O. When you use double O, you can use relatively thin dope and it'll penetrate through and you'll get a good adhesion. What I like to do when I'm doing medium silk span is get a little more thinner in it so it penetrates down, takes longer to dry, and get a better adhesion from the silk span. So let me do this. I'll just do one section here on the camera. Now I've tried doing foam wings with medium, and you add about 3/8 to a half an ounce more in finish when you're done with the substrate. So you may or may not want to do it that way. One of the things you can do with medium silk span, and this is a great idea, if you've sanded through the sheeting, and from time to time obviously we all sand through the sheeting where it's getting thin by the foam, well, that would be a great place to use some medium silk span or even some heavy silk span. But be aware, when you get medium and heavy silk span, you need a lot more dope to hold it down to the wood. Double O seems to stick the best. It seems like when you do medium or heavy silk span, you really have to get a lot of dope down under the tissue to get good adhesion, so when you pull up the tape, you don't wind up pulling up and delaminating the finish. Now I get a really good coat on here, and I'm going to kind of, this has 4 coats on already, especially by the glass here, I want to have even a little bit extra here. Make sure that's good and shiny and there's no dry spots. Remember, the thing you're trying to build when you build a flap is torsional rigidity. You're trying to build torsional rigidity without building thickness. In fact, when I'm done with the silk span job here, while this is drying, I'm going to put on the tape just some of my experiences with building flaps various ways. You have a lot of choices when you build flaps. You can build solid wood flaps, which Big Jim is in favor of, even though they tend to be a little bit, in my book, they tend to be a little bit heavier than built-up flaps. If you can get good C-grain 4 to 6 pound wood, you can make a beautiful flap with very little effort using the rod method. And I have that documented on one of the old videos, I'm not sure which one. Now what happens is, I'm trying to press this dope down. Because this is not double O, it's not going to just sink right in. I got to kind of press it in, make sure I get a good penetration. Now what I do is get a brand new paper towel and just press it right down. Flip it around, press it down. Now what this does too, it gets a lot of the water out. It's not really water, it's Windex, and the reason we're using Windex is so it evaporates a little quicker. Okay, and obviously then we like to get, remember the old trick, we want to get this silk span on one side, flip it over as quickly as possible and do the other side. The trick here is always use brand new razors and throw them away. Now Midgley gave me this great little scalpel blades, but he never gave me the handle. So I got to kind of do this. The scalpel blades work great, by the way. And we'll just get rid of that wax paper for now. Now I'm just going to leave the little piece on as we go down at the leading edge. Leave the little piece on by the hinge pockets, because I'm actually going to use that piece. Let me show what I'm going to do. I leave that little flap of paper there, and I'll just razor it here, and then press it down, and I'll have my hinge pocket silk span too. Now what I just said is just razor down those corners. I'd say the most important thing in doing a flap is to get one side tissued, and while it's still wet, before it dries up, and this is the reason for having a little bit of extra thinner in the paint, in the dope, it gives you a little bit of time to work here. Now some of the mistakes you can really make, I mean this is really one of the biggies, is if for some reason you decide you're going to put shrink dope on these flaps, you are dead. That airplane is going to have warped flaps from day one. I've tried that in an effort to make the flaps more rigid. Believe me, it doesn't work. It may work if you have open bay flaps. You may get away with putting one coat on because the silk span won't have enough pull to shrink the flap out of position. Definitely not a good idea. Only light coat on the flaps. All right, I'm going to flip that right over. There's my wax paper. Flip it over and do the other side right away. In fact, we could do the other side off camera. What am I talking about? Save some tape this way. Obviously, just do the one right after the other. That's the trick. Okay, now final thing is just pressing the hinge pockets down. Make sure all the corners stick. Now what I always like to do, as soon as I get both sides tissued up, and obviously they're both still sticky, is give a second coat to both sides so they're wet equally and they kind of dry equally, and kind of look down, make sure it hasn't built in a warp. Now this is fine. Okay, so we'll put this one aside to dry, and we'll do the other one off camera. This might be a good time to take a few minutes out and think about flaps. Now, you know, in the course of building 100 or plus more stunt ships and making flaps almost every possible way you could make them, I've come to a couple of conclusions, and I'd just like to share what amounts to be the experience of my lifetime with flap design. Number one, I guess if we all go back to the beginning, we have the solid wood flap of a Nobler. And we all know that was made out of 1/4-inch wood. It was solid wood. Usually it had 3 32nd horns, but it was a very good way to build small flaps for small airplanes. Nobler size airplanes, they were fine. What's happened though over the years is airplanes have gotten bigger and bigger, and a PM, for instance, uses 3.5-inch, so we'll just make this a little bit longer. They're still 1/4-inch wood. Still works very well. However, the tweener, the plane we're making now, the flaps are 3/8. If we were to make the flaps out of 3/8, and if almost 4 inches at the root, in my book they'd just be too heavy. Now Jim doesn't think so, but I do. Now that's why we've made the flaps the way we have with built-up geodetic construction. Now there's also foam flaps, and I remember Lou Dudka would make foam flaps that had sheeting, leading and trailing edges, caps, all kind. One of the downsides of doing foam flaps is they usually get too thick. I don't like to have foam flaps, and as many planes I've taken the foam flaps off, and this typically would be about 3/8 of an inch. I've taken off the foam flaps and put on 1/4-inch solid wood flaps, and the plane has flown much better. Now, I think some of the reason for that is when you have foam, first off, it's not as rigid. Certainly nowhere near as rigid as solid wood. I've never seen them as rigid anyway. But there are a couple other considerations. Now, another consideration of flaps is the torsional rigidity. If you look back at Relentless, I made the flaps pretty similar to the way they're done on a, I guess you could go look at a Juno plan. This would be a 1/4-inch core and then 1/8-inch ribs. And this was very rigid. Very rigid beyond anything I could imagine. The only trouble is this was labor intensive. Labor intensive to the point of you could spend a week making a flap. Now this is the flaps on Relentless. This is Relentless, of course, a big picture I have hanging in the shop. This was a foam wing, and the tail, the whole tail in fact, and the flaps were made this way, similar to a Juno. And this was so labor intensive as to almost be, you know, not productive. Now, what I did with Relentless, though, is I built a twin plane to it that had flat flaps. And the one with the flat flaps flew, if not as good, very close to being as good, and the amount of work that went into it was minimum. So there isn't much of a performance gain from having built up flaps like this, but they really do look sexy. You have to admit that does look sexy. Now if you were following the 1992 series of tapes, you'll know we took the 92 Cardinal, and it was 54 ounces, and it flew basically with flaps that were 3 inches to 1 inch, pretty much like smaller than what would normally be a PM type of flap. And down the road, what we did after the plane had gained the weight of the repair, we basically did this to the flaps, added a piece 3/8 of an inch. So this was now 3 3/8, I believe, and this was 1 3/8. It may have been a little different, but we added the area in the back of the flap. Now, something to keep in mind, if you tend to build heavier and heavier and heavier, if you build heavy, make the flaps bigger. Now, I mean, I don't go crazy here, but if you're building a Magnum and you know it's going to come out at 70 ounces, add a 1/4 inch to the flaps for sure. I mean, don't even fool yourself. there's another thing to keep in mind. Anytime the flap this dimension gets more than 3 inches, you definitely want 1/8 inch horns. Now check this out for yourself. If you have a 3/32 horn here and a 3-inch leverage arm, you basically have a rubber band in the middle here. There's no way this is going to be rigid enough. So my suggestion, when flaps get bigger than 3 inches, 1/8 inch horn. When planes get heavy, add a little bit to the back of the flap. 1/4 inch is a typical good number. It's not going to change the aerodynamics that much. Now, another thing you can do, if you have a 1-to-1 control system, let's just take a typical Pro Stunt 1-to-1 control system. Okay, this arm is 3/4, this arm is 3/4. I've built many planes where this arm goes down to a variable slider. If you go back to 1984, 1985, in fact, the 1987 plane has hatches in the back. The 1992 plane has hatches. Have these variable controls. Now, the only thing I've found that variable controls are real good on, if you have a very light plane. If the plane is super light, you can use a little bit less flap to get the corner. Now, the reason is light planes generally, general rule of thumb, don't have as good a corner as a plane that's built either to the right weight or a little bit heavy. They don't generate enough line tension to put a fantastic corner in. And for sure, if you want to go back and look at planes that I know that I always thought had great corners, and Walker's is one of them, and certainly Gene Schaefer's, and going down that way, they were always a little bit heavy, and they always had 1-to-1 controls. Now, when you build a plane below the weight that normally would be acceptable, then what you want to do is pull out a little bit of the flap control so that you can get your corner back. So if you're building normal or heavy planes, I wouldn't think that you needed, or there was even any reason to put this into the plane. If you're building super light, you might want a little bit less flap, and it might be a good choice. Now here's the little hatch underneath on the red plane, Tradition. Here's the little hatch right underneath that you access in to get the controls to make them more than 1-to-1, less than 1-to-1. But because this is a normal weight plane, it's I wish it was normal, it's heavy. Because it's heavy, it flies best at 1-to-1. Now, one of the experiments I did to the green plane, I made the controls less than 1-to-1 so that I had a lot more elevator than flap, and that didn't work well at all. That was terrible. This plane, being over 70 ounces, really needed all the flap it could get, and that was not a good, and that's been documented on one of the videos, I don't remember which one, but less than 1-to-1 flap on a PM was definitely not the way to go. Now, I did an interesting thing on the Red Baron, and this is going back a couple of years when I was flying them. I have a tremendous amount of slop built into this plane, and what I did is I replaced the bushing at the tail horn. I replaced the bushing so I had no slop, a little bit of slop, and a lot of slop, which in effect gave me more elevator or less elevator. And what always happened, the old Red Baron always flew best at exactly 1-to-1. That's where it was always the best. And the #1 ship, the new ship, of course, just has plain old 1-to-1 controls with the variable bushing up at the flap horn. I think that's the way I'll be going on most planes in the future. Now, one of the things I remember doing on the 900 sweeper, and this was way back in 1981, 82. This was a BJ design, a Big Jim design. I was real happy, by the way. This was definitely one of my best flying planes. And what I did is, it did not fly well in the wind. It flew really super when the air was nice. When it got windy, it was terrible. And what I did was I took out the 3/32 horns, and back then I didn't really know about 1/8 inch horns. We were all learning about 1/8 inch horns and how important they were. I took them out and put in 1/8 inch horns. And that was kind of a big, awful job. The way I did it is I had to cut a pie slice out of the bottom of the body, pull this piece right out, and I had to cut a piece out of the bottom of the fuselage, get in and Dremel and gouge and pull it all out, fiberglass it back in. It really was a messy system. This was a horror of a job to do. That's why I always tell people, if in doubt, put the 1/8 inch horns in to begin with. When the plane had 1/8 inch horns, it flew well in the wind, had more corner, and it was more predictable. I don't know how we could make consistency. Don't tell me that's spelt wrong either. But this was the big one, and the reason for this is when we had the thin horns in, every time you'd wipe the plane off, this plane had 4.5-inch flaps. This was 4.5 inches, this dimension here. Every time you'd wipe the plane off, you'd tweak the flaps. You'd turn the plane over and wipe it, tweak the flaps. And this is before we had tuned pipes. We were wiping a plane after every flight. This was unbelievable. And every time you'd, whoop, now the outboard wing's up. Whoop, now it's down. Now it's up. Now it's down. So if you need more consistency in your plane, one of the reasons for using 1/8-inch horns on the flaps, and keep in mind, this will add tremendous consistency into the plane. So these are just a couple of the thoughts that I want to give you on flap design, and obviously part of a flap design is the control system that's going to go in it. But one of the big things, and I guess this is where we really want to be right now, is the torsional rigidity. If you grab the root of the flap and you grab the tip of the flap, and you can bend it in this dimension. If you can go like this and bend it, torsional rigidity. Now, one of the things you get, these flaps that I made, the Juno type of flaps, super, super rigid. But like I said, very hard to build. Solid wood seems okay, not great. The geodetic flaps, any kind of geodetic structure, because it's triangulation. Triangulation gives you the maximum strength. You get strength anytime you can make an engineering shape a triangle instead of a square. When you do normal rib flaps, you have squares. The geometry is all square, and the corner-to-corner rigidity is missing. What you always want to do if you build a box structure is somehow connect the corners. Look at free flights, look at Wakefields, how they build their wings. But this is the best, and this is the flaps we've just built, so we're right back to where we started. But this is the best flap, most rigid, that you can possibly have. But if you build this flap and put a 3/32 horn on it, you may as well make the flap out of rubber. There's no point in building a rigid flap if the horn is rubber. And this is one of the things going way back when, and I'll give him credit, my arch enemy, arch friend, whatever you want to call him, Lou Dudka and I fought it out at local contests for years and years and years. Lou cut a lot of wings for me. He did a lot of good things for me. But one of the things Lou always was conscious of was rigid flaps, and he used to make flaps, foam flaps, solid flaps, all different kind of ways, trying to make the flaps rigid. And I'll give him some of the credit on this video for coming up with some of the technology that we use now on the flaps, especially the foam ones. The other thing you want to be absolutely sure of, no matter how you make a flap, if this is the flap, the grain runs parallel to the trailing edge, not the hinge line. Even if you build a nobler flap, and biggest thing of all, C grain. Even if it's the heaviest piece of wood in your toolbox or in your house, use the C grain wood at all costs. Now this is just one of the planes. This is the 82 plane. This is one of the planes that I originally built up, had built up flaps for, cut them off. I had 3/8 built up flaps, ripped them off and put solid 1/4-inch flaps on, and it flew much better with the solid 1/4-inch flaps. And I remember Al Rabe used to write articles about how the flaps should always be as thin as possible. I certainly believe in that. You should never have the flaps any thicker than they have to be. Okay, and we'll close this discussion out with one final thought. I remember Lou McFarland, many of his Sharks, the flaps were cut right about in the middle of the wing or further out. I remember some of Gieske Noblers that Gieske had cut the flaps so that the last 3 or 4 inches became a little trim tab. Kazi Minato did that. I think Randy Smith on some of his SB11s, the last inch or 2 or 3 inches of flap is on a little ball link. But my feeling is, and this is just my, my overall feeling having built planes all different ways, is the flaps should always go to full length of the wing. And from having looked at the planes that I think fly real well, among them Walkers, having the plane the flaps go all the way out to the end of the wing. I think that's a significant improvement. I think in this case, if you look at a Shark 45, he cut the flaps down to make them smaller because the elevators were too small. If this was a modern airplane, this is probably an 18% tail. If he increased this to 22, 24%, he could have used full span flaps. The plane could have been built heavier. Keep in mind, anytime you make the flaps a little bit bigger, you can build a plane a little heavier and there's no downside. So, just a few thoughts and we'll get back to our building project tomorrow. And I just hope these thoughts on flaps will help you formulate your program for the future. Flaps, they really matter. Okay, today what we want to try to do, get a little feel for how this is drying up. Get some 320 gray paper out. Again, we'll use our little parts for a test. This, of course, is a test to see how to, since we've put all this filler on at the same time, we can take a piece of 320 out and just get a little feel for if this is going to have to dry for another day. Now it's powdering off real nice. Remember the discussion we had earlier on in the 92 set of videos about how much filler to sand off? I believe it's tape 26 if anybody needs to look at it from the 92 series. How much to sand off, how much to leave on? That's the critical thing. So we'll do a little test. I want to show this on the macro lens now. And this is our filler coat. This is just what she would look like, okay? I want to go down to our box. This is what I just sanded on the camera. Of course, now she's nice and smooth, and this is about how much filler I want to leave on. Remember that old trick, I don't want to go back down to bare wood. That wouldn't do much good. It's nice and smooth, and the way I'm telling now, if it's dry long enough, this has been dry three or 4 days, I don't remember, is there's no little chewing gum bally things in the sandpaper. When there's little chewing gum bally things in the sandpaper, you know, you have to let the paint dry longer, or you know you didn't put enough thinner in the paint, or you put the paint on too quickly. You put one coat on, an hour later put another coat on, an hour later, for sure you're going to get it's going to turn into chewing gum. Now these little parts still have to be sanded, of course. And obviously we're not going to spend the whole time to sand this on camera, but we are ready to, this tells me we're ready to sand the wing. We're pretty much ready to go sand the wing. Everything is dried up nicely. 3 to 4 days is a good amount of time if you can wait. 2 days might be the minimum amount. And like I said before, one coat of dope in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. Or if you work a 9 to 5 job, put one on before you go to work, put one on when you come home. Skip breakfast once in a while, you're overweight anyway. I really don't want to spend too much time going over the finishing over and over and over again. We do have tapes if somebody needs to look at them, and I believe it's tape 26 on building up a good substrate. I'll really keep this to a minimum. This part now is ready to spray on a coat of clear or brush on a coat, depending on how much you really want to leave on. And then we'll put our test coat of silver on. Same thing, I'm always using the little parts as a test before I actually go and sand the wing. I'll sand the wing and the rest of the parts and do all this off camera to save some time. But that finish is coming out just about as nice as we could possibly expect right now. Now, one of the little detail jobs we did while we were waiting for some of this dope to dry up, we managed to get all our hinges dyed. Dyed them with RIT dye, boil the water, pour in the RIT dye, let the hinges sit overnight. You have to bring it up to a boil, and of course some of these are going to be the ones that go in the flaps that we can pull apart. The ones in the elevators are not going to be pulled apart. So we have enough here to do a plane, or actually enough to do 2 planes. And that'll be the end of these hinges. Anybody out there that has any IM hinges they're willing to spare, I'll take them, baby. This is about the end of my IM hinge supply. Also, while we were doing that, And I just want to mention this. So one of the little details that I don't like to see a big white zip tie around a black tune pipe. So what I did is I dyed up 1,000 zip ties here. I went out and bought them wholesale. And let me tell you something about zip ties in case you don't understand. There's two different kind of zip ties. There's ones that are heat resistant, and they sell for about 10 times the price of the normal plastic ones that you buy in a 5 and 10 cent store. Usually the ones you buy in the automotive store are okay too. Any ones that are a penny a piece, you know they're going to break. And I always would recommend putting 2 zip ties on the main thing that holds the pipe in if that's what you're going to do. So this is just one tip. You can dye your hinges, you can dye the zip ties, a couple little detail things. Also another thing, in case you don't know it, the props, what's the name, ASP props, you can put in dye and make them black too. Or obviously any color to match the plane. Just another little trick you can pick up off the video. Alright, the dope is drying now. And what we did last night, it was late last night, we got in here, sanded out the wing and all the little detail parts and sprayed on a coat of clear. So what I want to do now is I want to sand this out one more time. It looked a little rough last night. In a way you can tell if it needs another coat. You can feel a little dots of tissue coming through. That usually means it needs one more sanding and one more coat. But to build up the substrate up to before you put the first coat of silver on. So we're going to try to get that done today too. Now when we're dealing with foam wings, this is a word you're going to hear over and over again. It's more sensitive on a foam wing than it is on a built-up wing for a lot of reasons. First off, a foam wing, generally the foam and the wood and the glue weigh a little bit more, so you try to make up some of the weight in the finish. Now, a substrate usually consists of, and we'll just draw this out. This is going to be a piece of balsa wood. It's over foam. This is our foam down here. And if you get this concept in your mind, you're going to have no trouble figuring out either what went wrong or how to make the next one better. Step one is the wood has to be perfectly flat, sanded flat, with 400, 320, whatever, block sanded flat. If it isn't, if for instance this wood is rough, here's what happens. If the wood looks like this, you wind up filling in all these valleys with paint. And paint is 6 to 8 times heavier than wood, so you wind up with an awful lot of paint instead of a nice thin sheet. Picture Monocoat in your mind. You want to have Monocoat, but you want it made out of paint, not Monocoat. So step one would be to block sand everything out dead flat. Once you have it dead flat, you have a good start at figuring out how to get the minimum amount of paint on here with the minimum amount of weight. So let's just work up from a flat wood surface. If we can picture this in our mind, this is a sanded, usually my wings are sheeted with 16th inch wood, C grain at the trailing edge, A grain at the top. The first thing you would probably do is 3 to 4, I like to put 4 coats of clear light coat right on the wood, one right after another, maybe 2 to 3, 4 hours apart. Let's pretend you put 4 coats. That's 50% light coat, 50% V3608S thinner. You get 4 coats on it. At the end of the 4 coats, you don't really have to sand between coats. At the end of the 4th coat, you want that to kind of dry overnight if possible, and then take some 400 sandpaper or 320 and just block sand it flat again. Here's what happens. When you wet the wood with thinner or paint, the wood that's normally nice and flat now swells in spots, and it changes when it dries down. And you'll see when you take flat wood and wet it down, all of a sudden it, like a door on a house, it goes okay, and now as it dries up it goes back into position. Well, after the 4 coats and before the tissue, you want to kind of block sand it back down. And what I say here is block sand, fuzz off. You don't sand, you'll raise the hairs of the wood and whatnot. You want to get it back down to being smooth. Now you want to put the tissue on. Let's assume this is 00 tissue. You want to have a layer of tissue. And I've done some of that on the video so you can see roughly what's involved in that. And from the tissue up, you'd like to get on, now these are just rough numbers. You'd like to get on 4 more coats of clear. That usually does it. And you want to do the same thing. You want to, now the thing has gone back and it's a little bit better, but it still has ripples in it. So you want to sand with 320. Remember, this is the finish that normally would go on a foam wing. Now at this point here, you might want to make 60% thinner. You might want to add a little thinner so you don't get brush strokes. That's perfectly okay. It doesn't matter how you do this, in how many layers. What matters is you don't make the dope any thicker ever than 50-50, or you will not get good chemical adhesion. And you don't really want to make it any thinner than 2 to 1. 2 thinner and 1 dope. Any thinner than that, and the thinner goes down in and loosens up all the glue joints and swells the wood and whatever. You want to stay somewhere between 50 and 100% thinner, and you'll be safe. You'll be in a safe area. Once you sand that with 320, then what I like to do, and now you have to make a decision based on how your filler coat is. I like to put on 3 coats of filler. But remember, by looking at the video, I sand most off. You don't want to wind up with a ton of filler on it. Now what happens is after you sand the last coat of filler, and this is the step we did last night, then I like to, if possible, spray on 1 coat of clear, just to seal everything up. And that is now the basis for the silver. Now at this point in time, let me just switch this over. At this point, what you're going to wind up with is, again, wood, foam. Let's just make this up real quick. Wood that's very flat, a flat thickness of wood, and kind of, if I can do this to scale, and a substrate. This is now the paint substrate is this material. It really isn't critical if you put it on thick or thin, or as long as you stay within the parameters that you're getting the good mechanical adhesion. And if you put it on thin, you'll have less brush strokes. But this substrate now is what we're concerned with. The thickness of this substrate, if this gets to be too thick and you don't sand most of it off, what happens? Now you go into the silver. You spray on the first coat of silver, and that's a thin coat just to find mistakes. And you go and see if you have dry spots. If you have dry spots, obviously you spray on another coat of clear, another coat of silver. So what you're in effect doing is using these coats of silver to not only to pick out the bad spots and block sand them back down, but to get one thin layer over the substrate. The silver is not part of the substrate. Silver is actually part of the finish. But to get the substrate as thin and smooth as possible, and now when we start with the silver, what we're going to start doing is we're going to start wet sanding with Sikkens 600 and 600 paper. And that's how we build up the silver. In possibly 2 or 3 layers of silver, we build it up into, the first thing would be the substrate, and then we'll have the thin coats of silver all sanded down. And we just get the silver, the minimum amount, it's exactly how we want it, and we've just covered up the last little bit of dry spot. We then have the substrate, the silver, the wood, and the foam. And this is the base now. This is the base for all your finishing. You'll have a foam, wood, substrate, and silver. And this finish here will be absolutely flat, glossy, candlelit. You could buff this out. This is a perfect finish. And by doing it this way, you know you'll always have the minimum amount. Now a typical amount, this is just typical numbers. If you have a 750 square inch wing, it's in raw wood. These are the numbers that I typically accept as being good. 14 ounces in raw wood. After you have the silver on, 16 ounces. Those are good numbers. They're doable. They're not some crazy numbers you read in a magazine that nobody else can duplicate. These are doable numbers you can do over and over and over again with a foam wing, a 750 inch square wing. What it means is if you get to 17 or 18, try to save some weight somewhere else on the plane. But these are legitimate good weights. They're weights that'll help you get a realistic airplane. They're not going to give you the world's super lightest airplane. You're not going to be Billy Wurwitz with those weights. Those are good weights. And remember the old thing. If you have a foam wing, I like to just, this is the last time I'll draw this out. This is the foam and the wood and the glue. Remember, you have foam that weighs a little bit more than ribs, glue, which weighs a little bit more than the glue on the normal airplane. Sheeting, there's more sheeting. So you have three things that are more on a foam wing than on a built-up wing. But you've saved the time and energy of doing it this way. You know you're relatively going to have a relatively warp-free wing. You're going to be an ounce over the normal weight. I wouldn't let that make me crazy. But what would make me absolutely bonkers crazy is if the substrate and the silver weigh more than 2 ounces. More than 2 ounces of substrate and silver on a wing. You don't need it. You made something wrong. You did something either overkill, underkill. 2 ounces of dope on a wing, and it's in shiny silver, and it looks like aluminum. Now, if you can work within these numbers, for sure you can build a concourse winning plane. These are concourse winning numbers. If you go to 2.5 or 3 ounces, well, okay, maybe you won't have the concourse winner, you'll be in the second row, who knows. But these are legitimate weights you should work for, legitimate goals, and you'll wind up with planes that'll finish in the top 5 every year and win you the concourse whenever the people think you're due to win it. Anyway, these are basic numbers that you should have in your mind at all times when you're dealing with a foam wing. And remember, foam. Okay? Some of the things you get from the foam wing that are worth it. When you say, well, it's an ounce heavy, it's worth it. It's worth it. To most people. And you have to decide if you're one of the people that it's worth it to. It's worth it to advanced level flyers, intermediate flyers, low skill level flyers that want to knock out a plane in a couple of weekends, a couple of weeks, get the thing in the air and fly it. Yes, definitely worth it. If you're Billy Wurwitz or you're somebody who, Ted Fancher, who knows who's going to build one plane every 2 or 3 years, and it's going to be a killer light plane, you're going to try to get it down to under 60 ounces, well, I don't know. Just remember, Bobby Hunt won the World Championship, the Nats with a foam plane. Walker won the Nats with a foam plane. I mean, the list could go on and on. There's no, but Jimmy Casale won 4 Nats with a foam plane. You can win with a foam plane, but you have to, every step of the way, make sure you don't add any extra weight, because you're already eating up the extra weight of the foam, the glue, and the wood. So if you look at it that way, that it's worth it, if you're at that skill level, you can use the technology. The trick is save weight on everything, and the substrate is a good place to save it. All right, one final thought before we go sand the wing. Information, finishing information. There's 4 finishing videos. If you need more information, obviously beg, borrow, steal any or all of these, including the finishing seminar. Get a hold of them. There's basic dope finishing, advanced dope finishing, the finishing seminar, and a tape on sanding silver. 4 tapes, and if at the end of those tapes, if at the end of all 4 of those tapes you can't do a full-blown finished job that'll rival anybody in the front row, go back and watch the first one over, watch the second one over, the third. Spend those hours and grind into your mind what you're doing. You still have a problem. Next step, you know, call somebody. You can call me. You can call Midgley. Call these people that seem to be getting good finishes most or all of the time and are perfectly willing to help you. I don't want to put anybody else's name on here who might or might not be willing to spend an hour on the phone with you. I know Dave Midgley will. I know I will. Assuming my house isn't floating away or my wife isn't dying, I will spend the time with you, so will Dave. Get these people on the phone, get a letter out to them, or better yet, bring your plane to their house and ask. This is not the 1950s and 60s where everybody's looking to give you a hard time. All the information is available. Read Bobby Hunt's stunt column, any columns you can get about finishing, Frank McMillan's, some of Fancher's old columns, Winpaul's old columns, my old columns. columns. Get every one you possibly can get your hands on. Read it. Memorize it. If you're real serious about doing this, getting information put into a package and memorizing it is a big part of getting this done. It's not only sandpaper, it's getting all the latest information on there. There's one other thing you want to do. Okay, and I'm going to write this word in a word. This is a word you have to watch out for. Out in the world, there's a thing called nonsense. And nonsense is you're trying to paint planes with house paint. These are words I don't like to see anywhere in finishing. Anything with the word enamel. Anything with the word epoxy. Anything with the word polyurethane. All these are things that I would question that you can do the kind of finish that'll suit your needs the best. You can do the best finish with SIG dope and acrylic lacquer colors. This is absolutely the way to go. This is the way Billy Werwich gets his planes super light. It's the way I get the ones in my fleet that are super light, is to do the majority of the finishing with SIG dope, SIG silver, acrylic colors, and either acrylic clear, 390S, 380S, I'm sorry, or SIG light coat clear. But if you look at any of these products, I would say buyer beware. You are really running into a high risk, high weight, oh my God, the whole thing could go down the toilet finishes, or Aerogloss. Give the Aerogloss to somebody who needs to kill weeds in their garden. Aerogloss belongs in with the gardening supplies, not with the finishing supplies. And best is still SIG dope. Any of my planes that are super light, the 54-ounce plane from last year, majority to finish with SIG dope. And if you're going to do foam, it's even more important because, again, we got that word foam. It's real important with foam to save weight. So if you do a foam plane and it's already too heavy and then you go and put on some epoxy, some enamel, oh my God, and don't sand most of it off, oh my God, this is what you're going to be at the end of that finishing thing. You're going to be a sad puppy. Don't get too creative here. This is not a great idea. On foam wings, best SIG dope. That's my best sermon for the day, and we're going to get back to building. And I hope this information, you take it to heart, but most of all, I hope you use it. Now, I just want to run a little test. Obviously, this is sanded out, just like the diagram I just drew. I want to get a little look at what this looks like in silver. Well, believe it or not, that's just about right. You don't often hit it right on the first shot, but that's about right. See if we can get kind of a focus on just about what that looks like. That's about what the first coat of silver should look like. Now obviously tomorrow, the next day, we'll shoot everything silver today, and we'll come back in tomorrow and wet sand this down with the 600. But that's about right there. That's real close. Now we got the tweener wing and first coat of silver here, all the little parts over here, and the flaps drying back there. So we're kind of going to let this dry for a few days. Got all the little Mickey Mouse parts lined up here. What we're going to do is let this dry for a couple of days, come back to it. In the meantime, we're going to work on the other plane. The other one's sitting in silver. We have all these little spots to touch up on it, and we'll try to work on them right now. If you haven't seen tape 26 really goes into detail on sand and substrate and coats of silver. Tape 26 of the 92 series is a real good one on sanding silver if you like to know or need to know more about sanding silver. And I'd recommend you check that tape out before you go into any extensive finishing. In the meantime, we'll put this aside for a few days, and I think tomorrow we're going to work on the wife's dollhouse all day. Okay, now you can see our silver wing had a couple of days to dry. It dried up real nice, in fact. Now, at this point in time, we got to answer the phone. Well, just another fun phone call. Back to work. Okay, we're going to look at the wing right now, and we want to get an idea of where we stand as far as the substrate goes. And I'm going to do it on a macro lens. I'm going to look up close. From this point on, there'll be no dry sanding. All the sanding will be done with Sikkens M600 and 600 sandpaper from this point on. And we'll try to take a close look at this now. Now, one of the things this looks like to me, it looks like this could have used one more coat of filler if we really wanted to be fussy, but that's not a problem, because now the whole reason for doing it this way, the whole idea is now you don't have to worry. If you need more filler, we can just put one more coat of silver on and sand it off. Use the silver for filler. When you have too much paint on, then you're in big trouble. Now you don't know how much to take off. So let's take a close look at this on a macro lens and get some idea of where we are. Now you can see, we can still see the grain coming through. But remember what we're trying to do here, because this is a foam wing, we're trying to get that minimum amount of paint on. And we'll succeed. Now see right here, you can see some grain right in here. When you see that grain, now you know when we sand this coat of silver out, we might have to put 2 coats or 3 coats on this, who knows? It doesn't matter how many coats of silver you have to put on and sand off, because you want to wind up when you just have the 1 coat on and it's perfect. You don't want to have all the paint on and in the middle of the filler coat it's perfect. Then by the time you put the silver on, you'll have too much paint. Now the material we're going to be using to do this sand out is Sikkens M600. This is a degreasing agent. It's like, if you haven't seen tape, I think it's 26, the sanding out of the silver from last year's set of tapes. That's a good one if you want to go into more detail here. We're also going to be using 600 sandpaper. Now I've bought 4 or 5 or 6 different brands of 600 wet and dry sandpaper. Obviously it has to be wet and dry paper. I haven't found a tremendous amount of difference between the brands. The 3M seems to be the best. Norton is probably just as good. And some of the no-name brands, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. They're a couple of cents a sheet cheaper. Typically in the New York area, a sleeve of 600 paper is about $50. It may be $44 if you can get a discount or get it wholesale or whatever, but you're looking at, that's enough to probably keep you in sandpaper for the rest of your life. You need about 2 or 3 sheets of 600 to sand out all the silver on an airplane. You don't need a tremendous amount. So, we looked at this. We're going to go look at some of the other parts and just get an idea now for our first coat of silver before we block sand it out, what it is we're actually looking for. Now you want to remember this stuff, if you don't have calluses on your hands or rough skin or whatever, it may destroy your nice little pretty fingernails. But the trick is, put some in a Windex bottle. That's the easiest way to dispense it, the most economical. Don't think the Windex bottle is going to last forever. In fact, this one looks like it's shot. We may have to go get another Windex bottle today. When it goes, the good thing it went on camera. Now you can see what happens. There's a little seal in a pump, and it doesn't take long, and it goes. So what we have to do now, obviously, is go get another Windex bottle and put the stuff in a Windex bottle. Okay, we have a new Windex bottle now. Now it's good that that happened, because it gives you an idea that these things really do happen. It isn't like you might read in, I don't know, somewhere, and you think, oh my God, these guys never have a problem. These guys never drop anything. Baloney. Everybody works in the same thing. By the way, just mention on it, when these bottles, they tend to get brittle and crack after about a month. So it's a good idea to buy a couple extra things of Windex. You can always pour the Windex out, but you always want to have that atomizing bottle around. This bottle has lasted about a month. It looks like it's getting ready to go right now. The sprayer already went. So anyway, that just so you know that that's one of the possible problems. Now, we got it wet. We have the silver wet. Let's get a little idea of how much we're going to have to sand this down. Again, for the first coat of silver, we don't expect miracles. We always look to get 2 or 3 coats on, and each one wet sanded out. And it's actually, the fact that you're sanding with 600 now, you're not going to get sanding scratches. You're not going to get the problem of having, like you do with filler, when you try to sand with 400 or you try to sand with 320, you always wind up with sanding scratches. This leaves a real nice surface for the next coat of silver. We can get this, just get this on camera, just about how much time you should spend doing this. This is the tip weight box, of course. Again, I always use the little doors and hatches and flaps and stuff for a test. If you have an idea how much you're going to have to sand, as soon as you're done sanding, wipe it off. You can kind of hold it up to the light, and as soon as you can get a nice candle effect on it, that's just about right. Now I'm guessing one more coat of silver, I'll put this on a macro lens, one more coat of silver is going to do it for that guy. Yeah, you can see how much. You always have to watch the edges. The edges, you can see I've broken through the edge right here. Right here, there's a little bit of a breakthrough on the edge. As soon as you break through, obviously you want to stop. Broke through right here. But that little bit of sanding has gotten me, now I can actually candle this if I hold it up to the light. I'll try to do it now. Let's just see. Yeah, now you can see you can reflect the light off it. You can candle it. That's about what you should have. Now I'm hoping 1, maybe 2 more coats of silver are going to be a perfect substrate, and that'll make a perfect base for a finish. Now from this point on, again, why we're doing this, and being ultra careful not to get any extra filler or any extra silver on. Constantly, if you haven't seen tape 26, of course, constantly shake the decanted silver. Just to run a little test here, we did one little part, just to get a feel for how much extra material we have on there. Now another thing too, don't think you can run out and weigh this stuff the next day and see how much weight you've built up. If you weigh this right now and you weigh it a week from now, it'll be lighter a week from now, by a significant amount too. So you really have to do this by feel, unless you have a week between spray coats, and obviously most of us don't. Okay, now we'll kind of look at that, and let's see what that looks like up close. Now you can see the kind of finish we have on our second coat of silver with the macro lens. Just to get an idea, here's a gear door with 2 coats, here's a gear door with 1 coat. You can see the difference. Just to get an idea. Now you see those little bubbles around the bolt holes? Well, the next coat we'll obviously sand them out real lightly and put a 3rd coat on. It looks like this is going to be a 3-coat operation here. But the 3rd coat, number 1, is going to be perfect. That's number 1. And number 2, it's not going to be an operation where you have too much filler, too much substrate. Remember, that's substrate. This will absolutely be a minimum substrate, 2 ounces or less for the wing, for all the substrate, right up to the silver. Now another thing, don't think you can substitute Sig Silver here. Midgley found that out. He tried spraying one of his PMs with acrylic lacquer silver. It's useless. It'll add 4 ounces to the plane, and it doesn't show the mistakes like the Sig Silver. The Sig Silver is unique because it uses aluminum paste. It doesn't use flake. It has an aluminum paste that really is efficient at showing up the bad spots. So what we're going to do from this point on, obviously we'll sand the wing out, spray the wing the 2nd coat, and then come back to that. A friend of mine, Walt Russell, sent me this cardinal as a Christmas present. It's really cool. Anyway, I wish I could train this Cardinal to wet sand. Walt, you got to send me a bird that knows how to sand. Anyway, we're going to get busy doing the rest of these parts here. I just opened up my mail and saw this nice Cardinal here. I couldn't resist putting them on the video. Alright, so for this part of the operation, you may as well just sit down, turn up the stereo or whatever, and have fun sanding, because this is all she wrote. It should take an hour or more to get this coat of silver sanded out. Try not to go through in any spots, but try to get off all the high spots. As soon as you finish sanding, wipe it down. Now, just a few final notes. Make sure you get sandpaper wrapped around some kind of a little piece of wood. Get in by all the hinges and get the corners clean. Now we're going to get ready to go spray this with another coat of silver. Now, we really didn't get to finish this last night. It was kind of a busy night at the shop. But we did get to finish the sand out this morning. I did it off camera. We've got enough sanding on camera to choke the horse. What I want to do is I want to show this up close. Some of the things that I really want to look for right now. There's a bad spot on the top of the leading edge here, and I fill that in with red lead. Where the tip joins the wing, usually you'll have a little bit of a ripple. And the joints in the sheeting, if you see the joints in the sheeting raising up, well, you know you're going to have to put a little extra paint on that. I also like to do this, is rub my finger around everything nice and smooth. Feel everything with your fingers. Again, another thing, don't sand the joint in the center where the wing joins. Don't get that all paper thin. Just feel with your finger around for any spot that may be bad. Let me show some of this on a macro lens. Now, where you want to look, these are a couple of the spots that typically go bad. Right where the tip joins the wing, you usually get a little bit of a bubble, and you want to just carefully keep block sanding that down. This is a wing skin joint. The joints always seem to come up high, so obviously you want to address that. And as you're painting the plane, when you see a wing skin swell, spray an extra band of silver paint on it. Give you some material to work with. This is that little bubble we had here, and we sanded that down, filled it in with red lead off camera. Right here we have a couple of where the tissue joints, that you can't feel at all. That's sanded in just about the way it should be. But just to give you an idea of what this should look like at this stage in the game, and obviously the next step is we're going to get another coat of silver on here, and then come back and let it dry 2 or 3 more days, and then shoot it again. Or we'll go outside and shoot this right now. Okay, we had this drying this afternoon. We just want to take a little quick look at how this is the second coat of silver, how it's coming out. And obviously the best way to do this is to candle it. We'll try to look for any imperfections that need to be red leaded. so far this looks pretty good. Now, let me get the macro lens and show a couple of the little things we want to do to this. Now notice right down there, you can see there's a little bubble. And what a bubble is where the paint isn't sticking. I'm just going to put a couple of little dots. Actually, this is one of the few that we have. I'll put 100 little dots in it. And what I'm going to do, I want to get the thin CA. Put 1 drop of thin CA on that. Wipe it with a paper towel good. Okay, now we're just going to let that cure out, and when we sand this wing out the next time, it'll be a couple of days before we sand this out again. Let's look at some of the other mistakes here. We still have this little gouge here that's been red-leaded in. It needs to be sanded out a little more. Let's see how to tip. This is almost perfect now. Usually you'll get little funny spots along the trailing edge. Here's one of them right here, you can see. And we'll fill that in with red lead. Obviously, the trick here is to be real fussy. Keep looking around, find the little spots, keep candling it, look for any little areas that you think aren't just right. Go back over. Now, here's the punchline. You can go over this 100 times. You can put the silver on, take it off, put it on, take it off. You could put 20 gallons of silver on here as long as you keep sanding it off, and each coat will get smoother and smoother and nicer and nicer. So this is the time you really... Now, I don't want to be tempted this afternoon. I still have about an hour here in the shop. I don't want to be tempted to run off and start sanding this out and get the next coat on. I want to let it sit 2 or 3 days, come back to it, and sand it out again. All our little silver parts are over here drying. The flaps are back there drying. Now the silver has really had 3 full days to dry, and what I want to do now, and this is the next step in this kind of a program, I want to go over each part individually. I want to make sure I get out all little flaws in it. And this is a very time-consuming part of the job. I want to go over everything that looks like a flaw here. The wing actually doesn't look too bad. It's the flaps that look the worst. But I want to pick up on all the little flaws. And I'll try to show some of these with the macro lens. These are very minute. You probably wouldn't even see them. If you were going to paint the plane white, you probably right now could take the plane and just go paint it if it was going to be white, because you won't see any of these little defects. But you will see them if you paint it red, candy apple, black, dark blue, whatever. So what we want to do, I want to show some of these on a macro lens and then show how I'm going to repair them. Now you can see right along here. The best way to find these little defects, by the way, this is the whole purpose of the silver, is to rub your finger along it. Now see, you can see one right there. Okay? Anywhere you find one, and of course the fussier you are, the better off you'll be. If you just went and painted this, well, nobody's going to see that. Let's be realistic. But I see it. And if you build planes to please yourself, then you have to get out as many of these little things as you possibly can. I'm just looking around here if I can show some other ones. There's another little one up here that I don't like. There's like a little indentation in the grain. Usually you'll find them out at the tip because you're going into end grain. This one doesn't look too bad. And what I'm going to do is just carefully sand each one out. Here's a couple little defects in here I want to get out. I can see the seam between the wood. Now what I'll do is I'll take my old trusty red lead. Let's see, here's one out here. I'll take the trusty red lead and just try to hit all the little low spots. All of this is a little defect here. Looks like that was whacked. Now let this dry, preferably overnight. Come back tomorrow and sand it out. Now, in case you've never seen the material, you buy this at a body shop. It's called Nitrostain, for professional use only. Who the hell are they kidding? There's no professionals use this. All amateurs use this like me. Anyway, take a look. Read the instructions. Yeah, for acrylic, works with acrylic lacquer, blah, 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 blah. We know all that stuff. We know everything about that. But what we want to do is get a little trowel and start troweling this on. Now, a couple of things about using Nitrostain. Just a couple of the things about this product. You cannot make fillets with this. You cannot use this like glue. You cannot use this in any way where there's going to be a structure. This is a cosmetic material only. For all the little flaws that I just pointed out, and no matter how you build, there's several ways of getting these flaws out. Obviously, you can just go back and keep sanding over and over and over and over. But what will happen if you do that too much, you're going to wind up, the wood will be too thin in spots. In fact, when I look at these flaps carefully, the wood is too thin already in some spots. I really sanded down too hard on it. The foam wing, almost every foam wing I've ever seen has these little defects, and you can work on them at your leisure. Now what I'm going to do for the next couple of days, I do my day's work, I get finished with the day's work, and then I look around and I say, oh, I have an hour to spend, 2 hours to spend, whatever, and I'll work on it for an hour, sand it, put the Nitrostain on, come back tomorrow, put another coat on. This is just like silver. You can put as much on as you want as long as you sand it off. You got to be real careful. This is heavy too. You don't want to go putting a half a tube. The amount that's taken out of this tube, it's taken me 5 years to take this much out of the tube, building 13 planes a year. So you don't want to go using it and putting it on like it's toothpaste and making fillets and stuff. This has no strength, but it does do a wonderful job to fill in some of the little mistakes, flaws, grain. I see a little problem on the outboard flap here. It looks like somebody scratched it or whatever. This will fix it. On all the repair videos, this is the material that we use. It works well. Get used to using it. It tells you can sand it in 15 minutes. It's much better if you let it dry overnight. You can't put it on thick. Don't trowel it on with a trowel. You got to put it on paper thin. If you need more coats, sand that down, put another coat. Sand it down, put another coat. Don't just blob it right on. Keep in mind, 5 years, this is how much I've used. This is the original tube I had when I was in the motorcycle business. And I've been back in this for 12 years. So, anyway, let's just take a look at some of the other little defects and how much of this material we can put on to kind of fix them. Okay, one of the things you want to do is buy from SIG or from your body shop supply these little plastic trowels. They're very inexpensive, probably like $1 a piece. You got to keep them clean. They wear out quickly. You throw them away and you buy new ones. But now you want to look around for some of these little defects, and you want to take the smallest amount and put on the thinnest layer. And I'll show this on the macro lens. I just want to do one here so we can have one drying while we're working on the next one. The smallest, tiniest amount. Want to look around now? Okay, here's another little spot here. You don't want to get caught up in trying to use this like a sanding sealer or anything. Little tiny amount. Now what I think about doing, and I used to do this all the time, is I would only do the upper part of the plane with Nitrostain. I would never do the bottom, for the reason that the judges never really looked at the bottom, and I didn't want to carry around 10 grams of Nitrostain if nobody was going to see it. Now in the last year they have looked at the bottom of the plane, so you might want to rethink that. You know, that's kind of old technology now. Now I'll sand most of this out tomorrow. When I get in the shop tomorrow, I'll sand this out. And you just got to keep going around, looking around. Here's another little one up here. Be real fussy. Be willing to take some time. This is not going to be instant gratification. Good building takes time. You can't rush it through. It's like one of my friends told me, good dental work takes time. When you go to a dentist, if you're in and out in 5 minutes, you know you didn't get your money's worth. Okay, that about, let's see, any other ones here? That about takes care of that flap. And again, you want to be real careful about overusing this. This is not a substitute for good workmanship. But we'll go through now piece by piece. I'll do one of these on the macro lens. Now you can see that little defect up close. You know, a little line there. So what I want to do. Now another thing that's good to do, you can use razor blades, you can use IBM cards, business cards. Find a thing that you're comfortable working with. In the case of doing a straight line like this, sometimes a razor blade is the best. And as I said before, you can sand, in an emergency, you can sand this out 10 minutes later. If you let it dry overnight, you'll have a real good shot at having it look terrific. When you sand it out, now this one looks a lot better than the other one, except I see this line going up the whole flap, the joint line. And tomorrow we'll block sand this out a little bit. If you experiment with this material and use it from time to time, you'll find out it's real easy to pick up a little technique that's easy to show people, easy to use as a repair material. All right, here's now a typical one on a trailing edge of the wing. Paper thin. The whole trick is keep it paper thin. And once it's been sitting out on a razor blade for 4 or 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 1 minute, wipe it off. Clean the razor and go on to the next step. Now I just found a couple more spots here out by the wingtip that I want to take care of. Now on the bottom I had one section where the sheeting isn't laying down just right, so I'll let this sit overnight and then block sand that in. Also on the bottom here, one of the problems I had is I tried to put the minimum amount of filler on the bottom, and you can see, let's take a look on the macro lens, let's see just how. There's just not enough filler on the bottom here where the joint, where the silk span ends and the double silk span starts. You can see there's little moon craters there and everything. So, but what I'm going to do after the fuselage is in place, then I'll build this area up as I spray and work in the little fillet area. So for now, what's important for now is I'm going to put this aside, put this aside, put the flap aside, and give you the idea, at least give you the general idea here of what needs to be done. This is more than I like to see on a typical wing, but this is only 2 coats of silver. I'm going to sand this down, get the next coat of silver on, and hope the next coat of silver will be that thing that we're always looking for, that perfect silver. Okay, so we'll just put this away by the heat for night. Okay, today I did a little test. This has been drying 24 hours now, so did a little test just to see if this is going to sand down nice. Now, because this is a geodetic flap, it has a very slight bow around the ribs. I can't really use a block here. And I'll show some of this on a macro lens. Once this material is dry and you're sanding it with M600, it just disappears. It really does sand nicely. Now I want to show something on a close-up here. Now what you're really looking for here is when you close your eyes, rub your hand over it, that you can't feel it. Sure, you can see high spots. You can see all these little high spots here. You can see the edge coming through. You can see that this was a low spot. I call it a moon crater. But it's not a moon crater anymore. This is perfectly flat now. So the next step, we're going to go. Now this is just as it dried. And then what I like to do, after I get all the high spots low, is just sand back down all the silver off, which doesn't really take that long because this is a thin coat, unlike the first coat. And this is just going to stay in the little grooves now, in the little high spots. Now as you see the high and low spots coming through, you know these are the tops of the mountains. So you know when you rub your finger on this, you know this is going to be relatively flat now. So we can just go right on. Actually, I'm going to just do the whole flap. It doesn't take a long time. Once you build up a little technique, you have to build up a little technique. You can't press the sandpaper very hard like many little techniques. It just takes some time. Once you get the technique of sand and silver, you'll be able to produce concourse winners one right after another. It takes patience. The big #1 factor here is patience. You can't come into the shop at 8 o'clock in the morning and expect to be done in a half an hour. You got to be prepared to put some time in. Now I see the high spots coming through the silver, so I know I'm pretty well done with this little spot anyway. Get up in the corner there. You'll find out you always go through on edges, especially if you don't radius them after each time. And all we're looking for, the amount we want to leave on here, is very small. This little amount up here, which is in the low spot, this is all I really want to leave on. I don't want to leave gallons on. Now, one of the ways you can do this, and I've done it, it's not productive though, is weigh the parts on a gram scale and then weigh the parts when we're finished. Not really productive because you can always put a little more paint on or take a little off. And this wing is coming out within the weight parameters we set, so we're not too worried about it. But, alright, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go finish this flap, and you can see I still have some work to do up at this end. Work on this flap for a while, and try to get a little shot of it when it's finished. Now, some of the things you may want to try, and I'll just tell you that I've tried these things and haven't found them to work. I've tried using Windex instead of using, M600. I haven't liked the way that works. It attacks the wood if you leave it on too long. I tried using Prepsol instead of M600. That's not quite as good. It evaporates at a much slower rate, so what happens is it does attack the wood even more than the M600. I've tried using soapy water. That works reasonably well in the clear coats, but not in the silver coats. Because even if you just go through on a little edge, like I can see I've gone through on a flap edge here, on a hinge line edge, the water will go down and swell the wood and you'll have nothing but a mess. Now it's a little bit more difficult doing this type of a flap than either a solid wood flap or a foam flap, because the whole surface has a little bit of a up and down to it to where the ribs are, so you can't really press down. My suggestion is when you sand like this is don't press at all. Just keep spraying. It's actually spraying the liquid, much like machine shop work, where it's the coolant that takes the little chips or the little grit away, and it makes the job go fast and easy, is just by constantly spraying it. Now, it didn't look like it was going to be too bad of a day out there today. I might even get some silver sprayed on this tonight so we can get a look at how progress is coming along. This video is just going to finish up at whatever part of the finishing procedure we have in a wing, and we'll pick up the rest of this on some of the other videos when we actually assemble a plane. This is the fourth one in this foam wing series, which is the beginning of the 1993 shop series. Again, I just want to show roughly how much time it takes to do one flap surface, what the technique is. You need to practice a little bit. Not a bad idea to get out an old plane and practice on one of the bottom of the elevators or something until you get a nice feel for just how much sanding it takes to get the kind of a finish that you really want. Always keep a paper towel handy. somewhere about this time in the finishing time of my year. My hands are really starting to turn into alligator skin. Okay, that feels pretty good. And the next step is we'll work on the other flaps. The next step is we'll try to get another coat of silver on everything. I got this flap sprayed out there, and it looks like most of what we wanted to repair is taken care of. We might or might not put a fourth coat on this. I don't know. This is the third coat, and I'm pretty thinking this might be it. This might be, yeah, all the little things that we tried to correct on the earlier coats are taken care of. So hopefully we'll get busy doing the rest of this, and maybe we can finish this up today. That is the flap we're going to work on now. And I'm hoping we're going to get this, and this will be the last coat, but you never do know. And there's nothing to stop you from keep going back over and over until you get it exactly the way you want it. Okay, this is the other flap after being sanded out. Just want to put a little bit of on the little bit of footage on here so you can get a look at what this really looks like. And we'll go out and shoot this now in silver. Yeah, it looks like it's getting ready to rain. I don't even know if we're going to be able to shoot outside today. Okay, we got our flaps drying up. We're going to work on his wing for a little while now. I've been working on his wing for a little while, trying to get out all the little imperfections that I can. Now when I get to the trailing edge, I want to use a block on the trailing edge. I really don't want to use my bare hands because take a look at how this looks. And here's the part I just sanded, and this is really nice and smooth now. Should have no problem with the next coat of silver here at all. So we'll start working on some of these other areas. And again, when you get to these trailing edge spots, or any surface that you know is going to be dead flat, then it's to your advantage to use the sanding block. I guess if you really wanted to, you could go down to a local body shop and watch how the guy does body work, even though it's not totally appropriate. Some of the things you learned, I'm sure you could put to good use. They have little rubber blocks, by the way, you can buy in a body shop supply house. I haven't found that they've been really any better than balsa wood, so I stick with balsa wood. But the whole key here is not to give up. The key is to be fussy. And here's the thing, at this point in the time of building an airplane, it's really starting to shape up and you really want to get going, and yeah, come on, let's go, let's finish it. We're going to paint it this color or that color or do this or do that. But this is the point in time when you really have to be patient, take your time, not rush, and do as many coats of silver as you need, sand them all off, red lead any imperfections, sand the imperfections, until you're satisfied that this airplane meets your needs, your level of quality that you want to project into the hobby. You don't have to go by Ski Dombrowski's or by mine or by Stan Powell's or anybody. You go by yours. What level you want to be. Now obviously on this side, one thing nice is I'm just going to be able to touch up a few spots here. I'm not going to have to re-sand out the whole wing. And maybe I will show, I have the other airplane here. Maybe I'll show a couple of the spots that I touched up on that if we have a few feet of footage left on the end of this tape. That ship is now in silver, and so this would be a good time to show some of the little touch-up spots on it. And just keep picking away at it. Be fussy. The whole key is be fussy. Now where we have the big spot on the bottom, these Windex sprayers really don't last that long. They really get to be a nuisance after a while too. And what I may be able to do with this guy is hang him up by the wires and then just touch up the spots right here in the shop. Because it's raining pretty good out there now. I won't be able to do anything else outside today. But just to give you a look at, this is a tissue joint now. This is the amount of effort that should go into a tissue joint. Another thing too you're going to find out, your one right arm is going to get awful strong after a while. When you go to shake hands with somebody that monocoats, you know, you can body slam them or whatever. If you're into bodybuilding, I guess it's good, but I'm not. Now, let's see if we can just get a little close-up. You've seen how long this has taken to do. Let's see if we can get a little close-up on the macro lens here of just about what we're looking at here. But here's the part we still have to sand. This is the part we just sanded. That's about what it should look like. Main thing is you should feel it. This is all done by feel. You can do this with the lights out. Feel. You'll feel a nice, this is feeling just like a fiberglass boat or whatever. Right here you can see the tissue joint, the tissue line. Alright, here's our wing back in silver. You can see the spots where the tissue was joined together, and we've kind of got those worked out. We got the spots around the gear doors block sanded. We have the trailing edge sanded nicely now. And this about finishes up this video. I'm going to work on this guy for a while. As you can see, some little spots up there that have to be worked on, touched up, whatever. But it's never too late. Right up until the point that you put the colored paint on a plane, it's never too late. Now you can see some of the spots that I want to touch up while I have my hands all silvery and gooey and everything. There's some spots up by the nose here, by the scoops I want to work on. And obviously we can use the block on that. The spot on the side of the body here, we can use the block. Little spot back by the end of the fillet we can work on. So we'll spend whatever's left of today. We don't have much left today to just work the same way we did on the wing on this guy and finish up the silver, get all the little dents, dings, whatever you can think of out of here. This has been sitting aside for a while now, so this should sand out beautifully. Anybody that doesn't know, this whole plane is built on video, and it's a rib wing. It's not a foam wing. There's video available of building the home plane. This is a box wing right here, sheeted box wing. we're about out of tape. That's going to finish up the fourth tape of our foam wing video series. We hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be picking up tape 5 with the construction of the elevators and stab. And just one final note on this tape. We'll close it out with some pictures as usual, and we'll hopefully find some interesting things to round out your knowledge of the stunt event and the history of it and all the fun we've had doing this over the years. Working in the shop certainly is a thrill, and sharing it with you is even more of a thrill. So until tape 5, have a good one, baby. Now, anybody that doesn't know, these are the two most intelligent men in the world of stunt. This is Windy in 1985. Look at that beard. What a slush bucket I used to be. My God. No wonder they never let me win the Nats. Look at that. God, I'm embarrassed to show you these pictures. And Big Jim, of course, is his youthful self here. This is before his stroke. Ah, what a way to end the tape. Maybe I should never show anybody these pictures. This is a plane called Black Sunday. This is Big Jim's favorite of the BJ series planes, Black Sunday. This plane was built just before the 85 Nats, and it was a heck of a good flying plane. And what happened was, I had, at the time, had a set of horns made by a guy that was into atomic welding, and he assured me that these atomic welded horns were going to be better than brazed horns. So I went ahead and used them, and they lasted about 50 flights, and the elevator horn fractured in service. From that point on, we only braze horns, no more atomic welding. And that's what happened was, and this is a long story. Hey, I ought to go right into the next part of the story. That led to me, that crash led to me having 21 days before the Nats, and I built this copy of the plane, and this of course is the Killer B. Same plane. I used the same flaps and elevators, in fact. I didn't even have to make new flaps and elevators. Went home and built this plane, painted it, flew it, trimmed it, went to the Nats with about 2 or 3 test flights on it, and I won the concourse and came in 5th. The Killer B. And here's Big Jim doing some fine tuning on this. This again was Black Sunday. And I know it burns his rear end to think this plane crashed because of that atomic welded horn. Never again. Always braze horns, silver braze horns. And I guess this is a good time to mention, these are all foam wing planes, of course, and these were wings that Big Jim had cut himself. He did the polywog tails and he did the wings. These were a great flying series of planes, the 900, the 750 size, the 650 size, even the 35 size that Bob Barron flew and should have won the 84 Nats if the wind didn't blow. Just didn't. He had built it with a very flimsy construction and monocoat. Didn't handle the wind well. These planes all weighed over 70 ounces. They were bulletproof. They were easy to fly. And we always got a lot of riffraff from the guys that judged, said they didn't like the high aspect look. Really hated to see this design not live up to its full potential, because I feel one of the reasons because the people that judged just couldn't look forward enough. It's a real shame. This was a real neat plane. This was the Executioner, and this is out in Pennsylvania. Chuck Holsapple, I finally gave this plane to Chuck Holsapple. He flew it for a while. This guy right here is Rick Musnick. He really was an intense guy. He went on to be a bicycle racer. And this is what I always used to love about being pro stunters. Every year on my birthday, or when I came back from the Nats, my family would make me a pro stunt cake, and I'd try to eat the whole thing myself in one night. Some more pictures from the Fun Fly out in Pennsylvania. Good memories. We used to have a Fun Fly every year out in Pennsylvania. This was the front row at the Reno Nats. Jim Almer was in the front row. That was my F-16. And that year Jim Almer won the concourse. Yeah, just another picture of the F-16 from the Reno Nationals, 1984. You can see all the rib work on that, all the, oh geez, cap strips, rib work, built up tail, wrapped leading edges on the tail, rolled leading edges. All the carving in here above the fillets, the canopy. An unbelievable plane, the F-16 of 1984. Here's a nice picture of Jim Almer's Epic, a real nice plane. That was the concourse winner again in 1984. There's Ted Fancher's plane of that year, and Paul Walker unashamedly copied his paint job to good use. Never paid Ted the full commission either. Come on, Paul, send Ted the check. The check is in the mail. (1984). Well, we're going to close out this tape now on this Mustang photo. And remember, in 1984 certainly was a good year. Had my daughter at the Nationals that year. Had a real good time. Came in fourth. Was in the front row. It's one of the years I look back at and say, geez, this is all worthwhile.